Hello and welcome to Survey Design. Today we're going to talk about both theoretical constructs and construct definitions, and at the end I'm going to give you a little explanation about how those two things fit together in terms of a real-world example. So the most important thing that you learn when it comes to survey design is that surveys really work better for you if they are built up on some type of framework. A theoretical framework is a framework that has been designed and tested by someone else. So they have hypothesized that a certain group of variables will predict another outcome variable. And through years of study and research, they've proven that there are definitely links and in many cases predictive power in those variables. And so that's one of the reasons that I recommend using a theoretical framework, because if you design a survey based on that existing framework, you are much more likely to end up with survey constructs that will factor and better describe your variables of interest. On a side note though, theoretical frameworks do start somewhere. And so if it's not been tested, if it's just somebody's idea of how a group of variables fit together with no research and testing behind it, that's called a conceptual framework. So there is space in research to propose a new model and say, here's what I think will happen if we test all of this out. But today we're just going to focus on tried and true, on a tested theoretical framework. This particular one is called COM-B. COM-B stands for capability, opportunity, motivation, and those are the variables that then predict behavior. Because in social science, a lot of times what we're looking to do is talk about people's behavior or practices that they adopt, and what were the variables that led to or predicted that that would happen. All right, so in this particular framework, we've got three major variables, again, capability, opportunity, and motivation, but those are further broken down into an additional, 6 variables. So in capability, you've got physical capability and psychological capability. In opportunity, you have social opportunity and physical opportunity. And in motivation, you have automatic motivation and reflective motivation. So at this point, your assignment has been to find a theoretical framework that you will use to then explain some kind of behavior or practice change that's happening with your audience. So identify a theoretical framework. Get either a book or a research article that really describes each of these variables for you, because trust me, if you have the information that really spells out what all of this is about, it's going to help make your job a whole lot easier. Because then the next thing you have to do is start talking about construct definitions. So in survey development, we look at variables in two very basic forms. Constructs, which are represented in our model by circles, and observed variables, which are represented by squares. So an example would be, let's say you wanted to observe, do people eat vegetables at lunch? Yes or no? And you were going to sit in a cafeteria and you were going to look at each person eating, and you were going to place a check mark on there that said, yes, that person ate their vegetables, or no, they didn't. You observed the behavior. But more often than not, we don't do our research that way. Instead, we hand out a survey and we say, tell us about your behavior, or tell us about these other variables that may explain your behavior. And when you do that, you're getting into the realm of trying to describe something that's not necessarily observable. And so where an observable variable may be made up of a single question, a construct is made up of multiple questions. And so if you've got 6 constructs, you're going to have questions for each of these constructs. So you could potentially have as many as, well, we've got 6 constructs. We need a minimum of 5 items per construct. You've got 30 questions there right already, without even considering how many items you may use to describe their behavior. And understand that in this survey, you're not observing their behavior, you're asking them to tell you about their behavior. So again, you're using a construct and you want a minimum of 5 items. So now in this particular theoretical framework, because we have 7 circles, right, constructs, we know that we're going to have a minimum of 35 questions on our survey. And that's without even taking into account things like demographics, where you talk about gender, race, age, any other variables like that, income, education level, that would be important to you. Okay, so we've got constructs, and the second part of your assignment is to define those constructs. So what I want you to do, and I didn't put one for behavior, because a definition for behavior, because that's going to be very dependent on the specific behavior that you choose. Let's work through what the definition of each of these constructs is based on the literature. So physical capability. In the literature, you can find a definition that says that physical capability is having the necessary skills to perform that behavior or make a change or adopt a practice. Psychological capability is the capacity to engage in necessary thought processes. So that's a cognitive comprehension type of construct. Social opportunity, having access to a social support or environmental system that helps a person achieve a certain behavior. Physical opportunity, having the needed tangible resources. Reflective motivation, having necessary knowledge to make a decision. And automatic motivation, emotions and impulses that drive decisions about a behavior. So at this point in time, you're probably going, okay, that all sounds really nice and it looks like a lot of research, and I'm still not really sure what she's talking about. So let's give this a real world example, which is what I want you to do with your theoretical framework. I want you to draw one of these based on the theory you choose. I want you to define each construct based on the literature, but then I want you to put it in context and say, and we'll use physical activity as our example. Start with the behavior, and you want me to talk about my physical activity behavior. You may ask me questions like, and again, these all have to go on a scale. So you're going to ask your question, and then you're going to have responses that we'll get to in Module 3. But this just makes it easier for us to have this example conversation today. So you got 5 items describing my physical activity behavior, and we're going to ask these questions so that the answers I provide are on a scale of 1 to 4. Strongly disagree, disagree, agree, or strongly agree. That said, you may ask me something like, and I'm going to word this question the way I would see it on the survey. I am physically active a minimum of 5 days a week. I am physically active a minimum of 30 minutes a day. And each of those questions I could answer with strongly agree to strongly disagree type responses. Then, after you've got all your behavior questions figured out, move over here to these other constructs. And these are the more difficult ones. It's really easy for us to identify and write questions that describe our behaviors that we want to see, right? But it's when we get into these more complex constructs that it becomes a little more difficult. So I'm not asking you to write items right now. I gave the item as an example. All I'm asking you to do is take this definition and put it in context of the real world. So here's your example. Physical capability as it relates to my physical activity behavior. Do I have the necessary skills to perform physical activity? So think about that in terms of, do I have the physical skill to be physically active? Do I have the physical health to be physically active? So again, you're not getting deep into, well, what questions am I going to ask? You're just giving some examples that build on this definition and put it in your real world context. Let's move to the second one, psychological capability. Do I have the capacity to engage in thought processes and comprehension about this? This was one that I had a little confusion about myself. So I searched through the literature for many examples of what does that look like? Because that's what we all do when we develop a survey. We look for examples from others who help us understand it. So in this particular instance, do I have the ability or the capacity to understand the impact of physical activity on my health? So thinking through, what kinds of questions might I ask? We're not going to give examples today, but do I have the capacity to understand the impact of physical activity on my health? Social opportunity. Do I have friends or family who will provide an environment that's supportive of me being physically active? We all know examples of people who became really physically active because they had a friend, or they had a coworker, or they had a family member who became physically active with them. So looking at how social support, friends, family, coworkers, helps to make behavior change. Do I have the physical opportunity? These are tangible resources. Do I have shoes? Physical activity shoes that are appropriate. If I only have kids, well, I can probably walk, but I may not want to take up running because I wouldn't have the appropriate equipment to be physically active. If I was going to get into weightlifting, I may not have good equipment, but I may be able to adapt some things that I have at my house. Do I have resources other than weights at my house that could be adapted? So can I identify resources? Another example of physical opportunity is, do I even have a safe environment? Because a safe environment becomes a very tangible resource if I don't have a place that's safe to be physically active. Reflective motivation. So this is making that decision about the behavior, right? And probably one of the best examples is, do I intend to do this? Have I made a conscious decision to be more physically active? Have I reflected on all the pros and cons of physical activity and decided, yes, this is something I want to do. I've set a goal for it. And then automatic motivation. These are your impulses and emotions. And I always use this example with automatic motivation. If you ask me my automatic motivation as it relates to physical activity, I'm going to tell you that my impulse is to say, no, I just don't feel like doing that. So looking at emotions, I don't feel like doing it, right, is an emotion. and just your basic impulses. What is it that at heart, in my heart, I look at it and say, it's too hard, I don't have time, I'm too tired. So emotions that drive the decision I make to perform or not perform a behavior. So I've not written a single survey item, right? But I've given you real world examples of how each of these definitions could play out in a survey. And that's what I would like for you to do. I would like for you to choose a theoretical framework, define each of the constructs using the research literature. Don't make up your own. These will be written for you. But then go back through and think about, okay, now what does this really mean in my context, given what I want to study? And that's what I would like to see you give as examples. So 3 things to do: select a theoretical framework, define your constructs, and give real-world examples. And that will get you through the first maybe 1 or 2 assignments. I can't remember now, but we'll look at that and see. All right, if you have any questions, email me those questions, and I will address those either by email or maybe in another video. Thank you.